Most of you aren't subscribed. Make sure to subscribe, as it helps out the channel. Without further ado, beginning our series, we follow our MC Haru, promising to never forget about his childhood friend Mi, even after he moves away. As a promise, Haru promises to return and marry Mi, but as we cut to the present we see an older-looking Haru daydreaming whilst on a bus, suddenly noticing a young girl staring at him. Out of nowhere, their bus suddenly swerves out of control, accidentally driving into a railway only to be struck and crumpled by a train. As Haru's life flashes before his eyes, he can only remember the moment when Mi agreed to marry Haru in the future, but as Haru awakens, he seems to have been transported to another world. Located in the kingdom of Beltram, in the year 991, Haru wonders if he is Ryo or Haru. Going through his past life memories, Haru manages to easily remember his time sparring with his master, along with the moment he saw Mi flirting with another boy. But as Ryo attempts to sort out his memories whilst having a fever, he suddenly hears some men calling out to him, surprised to see that Ryo is still alive. Ignoring Ryo, the men place a precious piece of cargo, all sitting down to enjoy a meal, pleased to have earned 10 gold coins for a simple job. Starving, seeing the men eat, the men order Ryo to get lost and wash himself, forced to leave as he scrounges for some wild berries. Knowing that in his former life he was Haruto, a 20-year-old university student, Ryo reminds himself that in his new body he is a boy that needs to avenge his mother. Flashing back, Ryo faintly remembers his time with his mother, curious as to why their family has unique black hair. Upon learning that his grandparents also have black hair, Ryo asks to visit them in Yagumo one day, but before that could happen, Ryo's mother was sadly slain. Wiping away his tears, Ryo prepares to head back, but is suddenly stopped by some girls in hoods, demanding to know if Ryo has seen a purple-haired girl anywhere. Believing that Ryo is incapable of speaking, the girls prepare to leave, but Celia speaks up, asking Vanessa for permission to interact with Ryo a little longer. With a calmer tone, Celia asks for Ryo's name, impressed to see Ryo's black hair. Celia asks if Ryo could tell them where to look if they are searching for a missing person, but Ryo advises against it, especially since the ladies are wearing such nice clothing. Realizing that Ryo is right, Vanessa states that they should return with a more fitting disguise, but the two younger girls get worried they won't find Flora in time. Just in case, Vanessa asks for Celia to scan the perimeter so as to not waste time, prompting Celia to cast a large search spell, something that shocks Ryo. Surprisingly, Celia along with the girls realize that Ryo has magic flowing out of his as well, something quite rare especially amongst orphans. Seeing as there were no other magic sources detected, the girls conclude that Flora must be up ahead, but first the girls head off needing to change. Before she forgets, Celia hands Ryo payment for the advice, shocking Ryo as Celia paid him quite a lot of silver coins. Fearing the coins will get stolen, Ryo quickly runs back home, announcing himself as he enters the home. Ryo is caught off guard when an assassin lunges towards his heart. Having barely missed Ryo's heart, Ryo loses his pouch of coins as the pouch protects him, but Ryo also notices that all the men from earlier have been slain. As the assassin prepares to finish off Ryo, a sudden spirit appears before Ryo, offering to show Ryo how to control his magic. In a split second, the spirit advises Ryo to take the magic overflowing from his body and use it to physically enhance his body. As the spirit departs, Ryo listens to the spirit's advice, slipping a slash from the assassin, only to land a clean punch on the attacker's stomach. Surprised, the assassin casts an enhancement spell of his own, attempting to match Ryo's speed. Ryo nonchalantly flips backwards only to land a kick to that attacker's face. Now annoyed, the attacker goes rogue, swinging his blade aimlessly, but Ryo takes the chance to bind and break the attacker's knife-wielding arm. Shocked at Ryo's athletic feats, the assassin tries to grab a hold of Ryo, but Ryo simply flips the attacker over, knocking him out before Ryo can land any more blows. Assessing the situation, Ryo notices the precious cargo is squirming, choosing to open the bag only to confirm that it is indeed the purple-haired girl, Flora. In complete shock, Flora begs Ryo to take her home, offering to pay him fine if he complies, but before she can say anything further she falls unconscious. With nothing else to do, Ryo begins lugging Flora out of his village, but spots Celia and the other girls have returned with new disguises. Believing that they caught Ryo red-handed, Christina slaps Ryo in the face, calling the others to check on Flora. Stepping in, Vanessa asks Celia and Rona to begin healing Flora whilst they speak with Ryo, but before Ryo can explain the situation, Christina accuses Ryo of kidnapping Flora. Seeing as Christina isn't listening, Ryo attempts to grab Christina's hands, but upon realizing that Christina is being injured, Vanessa raises her blade to Ryo. Diffusing the situation, Vanessa states that Rio will follow them back into town, but seeing as he has no choice, Rio accepts. A few minutes later, the kingdom's men seize Rio's home, discovering that the assassin is still alive, but in the crowd a hooded figure destroys a mysterious object, tying up any loose ends. Cutting to the royal kingdom, we see that Rio has been tied up and is now being interrogated by the vice-captain of the royal guards, Charles Arbor. Charles states that if Rio cooperates, he'll promise Rio will be released, but when Charles demands Rio admit to kidnapping the princess, Rio refuses to lie. Punching Rio in the stomach, Charles insists the Rio play along, but at the same time Flora awakens caught up on everything that has transpired. Hearing that the boy that saved her is being interrogated, Flora rushes to get permission to speak with him, but as the sun begins to set, Rio is seen badly beaten. Refusing to divulge any sort of information, desperate, Charles continues to lay into Rio, but Charles's men wonder if they should stop. Charles reminds his men that they were the ones that allowed Flora to be kidnapped, so they need to redeem themselves, but at the exact moment, Celia and Vanessa appear, demanding to know what is happening. Announcing that Flora owes her life to Rio, Charles and his men have no choice but to let Rio go, cutting to later that night when Rio has been healed by Celia, learning that Celia is learning healing magic. Happy to see that Rio is alright now, Celia apologizes for all the trouble Rio's been put through, revealing that the king would like to congratulate Rio for his help today. Surprised by the sudden turn of events, Rio asks if Celia would help teach him the proper etiquette to greet the king, cutting to the next day when Rio has cleaned up his scruffy-looking demeanor, revealing himself as a handsome prince, as he kneels before the royal family. Several days later, Rio is seen speaking privately with Celia, telling Celia how he has yet to learn how to read and write. Understanding the situation, Celia offers to tutor Rio after school, instructing Rio to visit her in her lab under the library. As Celia guides Rio to his first class, Celia reminds Rio that the students within the school reign from noble families only to officially welcome Rio to the Beltram Royal Academy. With Celia introducing Rio to everyone, all the students immediately gossip about how a boy from the slums had saved a member of the royal family and henceforth was allowed into their prestigious school. Flashing back, when Rio had kneeled before the royal family, the king had thanked Rio for saving his daughter, offering to sponsor Rio and grant him a scholarship to attend the Royal Academy. With Rio introducing himself, Rio is immediately mocked and laughed at, but as class starts, Rio is forced to sit at the front alone. Kicking off the class, Celia asks everyone to attempt to solve the problems she's written on the board, but as Rio attempts to work on the problems, Celia reassures Rio that he doesn't need to push himself since it's his first day. After school, Rio goes in search of Celia's lab, knocking on her door only to spot a frantic Celia answer the door. Seeing Celia shaken up, Rio realizes Celia forgot about their private lessons, but Celia still warmly welcomes Rio into her messy-looking room. Seeing all the books scattered around, Rio wonders how old Celia is, shocked to hear that Celia is only 12 years old but has already graduated high school. Working through the afternoon, Rio impresses Celia as he solves simple multiplication and division problems, something only Princess Christina is capable of as well. Seeing as in his past life he was a university student, Rio made quick work of the simple problems, making Celia curious as to where Rio learned such a thing. Rio mentions how his deceased mother also helped teach him things, but Celia changes topics, offering Rio some tea to stop Rio from thinking about his deceased mother. Wrapping up the first day, Celia asks if Rio had any issues on the first day, but holding back his opinion on the others bullying him, Rio simply asks for book recommendations for him to learn how to read. The next day, the students are given combat lessons, but the instructor chooses to teach Rio independently, asking Rio to try landing a strike on him. Seeing Rio drop his shield and take a battle stance, the instructor gets curious, welcoming Rio's unique battle stance. Reminded of his former master, Rio charges head-first, reusing attack patterns he had learned, impressing both the students and the instructor. Spotting an opening, Rio chooses to rush towards the instructor, but unfortunately the instructor barely manages to block the blow, something that impresses the students, but some still make fun of Rio. As the instructor compliments Rio for his potential as a knight, Rio shoots down the offer, choosing to head to the library instead to study. Spotting Rio alone, Celia reassures Rio that he doesn't have to try too hard, but Rio simply states that he doesn't want to waste the opportunity he's been given. On the day of the exams, Rio manages to blitz through all the exam questions, making his fellow students envious. Finishing up his exam, Rio gets flashbacks of his school life and the day he saw me with another boy. Returning to his room, Rio recounts that Hayase Miharu was once Amikawa Haruto's childhood friend, but they grew apart until one day Haruto stopped seeing me around. Seeing as he's now been given a different life, Rio states that he'll live his new life to the fullest, cutting to the next day where all the students are crowded around to see their scores. Shockingly, Rio and Christina have scored the highest marks for their grade, something Alphonse refuses to accept, especially since Rio is a commoner. Seeing as they heard enough, both Rana and Christina demand the Alphonse try harder next time, but when Alphonse refuses to stand down, Celia intervenes, confirming that Rio achieved his score fairly. That evening, Celia celebrates Rio achieving the highest mark for his grade, but Celia does feel bad since Rio will most likely be targeted by others moving forward. Luckily, Rio had already prepared for all of the slander and bullying, something that Celia adores in Rio, making Rio curious if Celia experienced something similar. Celia reveals that she too was bullied by others more noble than her, but it wasn't anything she couldn't handle, leading Rio to tease Celia as he states that Celia is his first ever friend. Cutting to several years later, during the year 996, the combat instructor states that the primary division for their class has been decided. First off is Alphonse, next is Stuart, and finally is Rio. When Alphonse refuses to accept a magicless commoner as one of their knights, the instructor states that his decision is final. That evening, Celia jumps at the news of Rio being selected to participate in the upcoming tournament, mentioning how Rio might even be scouted to become a knight. As Rio helps Celia put back one of her books, Rio reminds Celia that he has no intentions of becoming a knight, but Celia is more amazed at how much Rio has grown, compared to Celia herself. Sitting down to enjoy some tea, Celia mentions how lovely the tea Rio brewed was, asking why Rio doesn't want to become a knight. Rio reveals that he has no intention of staying in the kingdom, as he plans on traveling, upsetting Celia. As a compromise, Celia offers Rio a job at the academy, sad that Rio won't be around to help Celia clean up and relieve stress. Sadly, Rio knows that him being around won't do any good for Celia, especially since Celia will have to marry someone eventually. Celia utters that she has no intentions of marrying anyone anytime soon, getting flustered when Rio mentions how cute Celia is. Seeing as Rio has made up his mind, Celia asks where Rio plans to travel, shocked by her Rio plans on visiting Yagumo, the edge of the wilderness. With the day of the tournament arriving, Alfred Emerald is tasked with refereeing the match, announcing Rio as the first challenger. With Alphonse advising Rio to not make a fool of himself, Rio steps out onto the arena, realizing that he is pitted against the royal guard, Charles Arbor. Remembering Charles as the man who tortured him, Rio and Charles exchange indirect insults, both ultimately taking their battle stances. Inspecting Rio, Charles notices Rio doesn't have a shield, choosing to go on the offense as Charles plans to punish Rio for his 5-year demotion. With Celia shocked at how serious Charles is taking the fight, Rio calmly waits for an opening, disarming Charles. When Charles refuses to accept defeat, Alfred steps in, ordering Charles to accept his defeat with dignity, ultimately crowning Rio the victor. With Alfred making note of the promising talent that is Rio, we cut to later that night where Charles is having a drink with the ambassador of the Proxia Empire. Upon hearing that he was the only one that lost to a student, Charles states he would have won if he took the battle seriously, but the ambassador is more surprised to learn that Rio was the sole survivor during Princess Flora's kidnapping 5 years ago. The next day, Celia hides waiting to celebrate Rio's victory, but upon tailing Rio, Celia discovers a girl confessing her love to Rio, feeling jealous for the first time. That night, Celia looks over her students' plans for after they graduate, surprised to see that Rio's paper is not filled, reminded that Rio plans to travel once he graduates. The next morning, Celia teaches a class of magic control, telling all of her students that channeling odd into matter will cause interesting things to occur. When Celia states that their 6-year class along with the 5th years will be using lightning as the demonstration, Alphonse takes the opportunity to point out any mage should be able to wield lightning, throwing shade at Rio for being unable to wield any form of magic. Seeing as Alphonse and his friend are mocking Rio, Celia asks for the two to demonstrate their lightning control, watching as the two boys show off their magic circle. Just as Celia suspected, the boys have yet to master even the basic lightning spell, shutting all the blinds and dimming the room. Celia states that although a person's affinity dictates the user's ability to wield magic, a person's use of artifacts and training also play a crucial role. As a demonstration, Celia combines 2 spells, conjuring multiple light balls that explode, lighting up the darkened room. With Rio amazed by Celia's amazing feat, he secretly wonders why he's able to copy Celia's spell, but with a smaller output. Wrapping up the class, one of the students, Stuart, praises Celia for her amazing feat earlier, turning to Rio only to scold him for flirting with Celia. Not wanting any trouble, Rio apologizes all whilst Flora watches, but Celia steps in, asking Stuart to stand down and not make a fool of himself. As Rio leaves the room, Flora wonders if she should have said anything, but Christina reminds Flora that not intervening and not causing a scene was the right thing to do, something Rio understands very well. Cutting to their students' next exercise, the students are tasked with an outdoor practicum in hopes to test how well the students have learnt military exercises. When Flora gets nervous, Rana reassures Flora that most activities are done in teams and that they shouldn't be facing anything too dangerous. Taking charge, Alphonse states that they'll be taking the shortest path to reach their goal, with the plan to finish before sunset. Speaking up, Rana mentions how the woody terrain should actually take twice as long as Alphonse plans, but Alphonse reveals that he's already mapped out a route for them to take. Apparently, Stuart had helped Alphonse survey the forest, settling on a short route that should give them an advantage. When Rana wonders if this tactic could be considered cheating, Alphonse reminds Rana that knowledge is key in battle, and seeing as Christina isn't against it, Alphonse orders everyone to get ready. Off to the side, Stuart tells Rio he should be grateful, ordering Rio to carry all of the team's luggage. When Flora offers to help carry some of the luggage, Rio reassures Flora it's fine, annoying Flora as she complains to Christina about how unfair Rio is being treated. At that moment, the students are ambushed by a swarm of goblins, but remaining calm, Alphonse readies his blade, ordering his vanguard to follow suit after they've physically enhanced themselves. Easily slaying the swarm, Alphonse thanks his men, ordering Rio to stop dozing off as Rio seems to have sensed something nearby. Having witnessed everything, a shady hooded man wonders if he should use the opportunity to test Rio's true capabilities. As the gang of students reach the end of their map, Alphonse suddenly realizes that they are standing before a cliff, shaken as he wonders if the map was wrong. When the students begin pressuring Alphonse to make a decision, they all suddenly spot several orcs appear, all beginning to panic. As Alphonse tries to calm everyone down, Stuart is suddenly cut by one of the orcs' spears, stuttering around only to accidentally shove Flora off a cliff. Reacting fast enough, Rio physically enhances his body, leaping towards Flora, only to push Flora back onto the cliff as Rio himself free falls down. Having been saved, Flora worries about Rio, but Christina and the other students finally shake off their nerves, getting into formation only to slay the rogue orcs. Back with Rio, he's seen perfectly fine, having used some last-second wind magic to soften his fall, but Rio does mention how use of magic is quite peculiar, wondering if the spirit he met long ago was the cause of this. Seeing as Rio should head back to the group, we cut to Stuart who seems to be interrogated for pushing Flora off the cliff. Guilty, Stuart instead spins up a lie, stating that it was actually Rio that pushed Flora, something that Flora disagrees with. Sadly, since they have no time, the students agree that they should find their way out of the forest first and return with a search party for Rio, but Flora is very against it, stating that she'll go and find Rio herself if no one is willing to. Out of nowhere, a massive beast appears from the forest, prompting Christina to attempt to shoot it down with some lightning, but the beast nonchalantly deflects the projectile. Taking charge, Alphonse orders the rearguard to enhance the frontliners, watching as the vanguard charge towards the beast, but sadly the beast swat away the frontline with ease. With no choice, Alphonse orders for a retreat, reassuring Christina that Flora must have escaped already, but it turns out that Flora had stayed and is instead healing an injured student. Discovering Flora's location, the beast slowly makes its way over to Flora, but before it can reach out to Flora, Rio appears severing its arm. Buying time for the princess and the injured student to escape, Rio runs circles around the monster, wondering why he blew his cover to save Flora. As Rio goes on the defense, he patiently waits for an opening, leaping forwards only to decapitate the monster with a single slash. Hearing the other students nearby, Rio decides to leave first, running through the forest all whilst the hooded man recognizes Rio's black hair as a user of the spirit arts. That evening, Celia heads to the headmaster's office to report her findings on old monsters, but before she can knock, she overhears that Rio is nowhere to be found. Charles begins defending Stuart's name, advising the headmaster to prioritize the safety of the students over a mere orphan boy, something the headmaster agrees with as they all agree to blame the incident on Rio. That night, Celia can't help but think about Rio's well-being, completely infatuated when she hears Rio's voice, rushing to embrace him. As both sit down, Celia feels sorry for Rio, as he is now blamed for something he didn't do, but Rio reassures Celia that it was inevitable especially since he is not of noble status. With Celia confirming that Rio will be heading to the Yagumo region, Rio promises to write letters to keep Celia updated on his adventures, uttering that he'll be using the alias of Haruto to send these letters. With nothing else to say, Celia asks that Rio come back one day, but as Rio leaves, Celia cries that she'll be waiting for Rio's letters and his return. At the same time, we see Charles visiting a strange person, giving them the scent of Rio only to order for Rio's assassination. As 3 days passed by, Rio began writing his letters to Celia, having made it to the market town Amand within the Galark Kingdom. Heading towards the city gates, Rio checks to see if he is among the wanted list, relieved as the news for his capture has spread too fast. As Rio heads through town, a mysterious figure can be seen tailing him, but when Rio turns to check, he doesn't see anyone, brushing it off as his paranoia. Passing a stall, Rio gets intrigued hearing that they sell pasta, a dish created by Lady Lissalot, the governor of Amand. Seeing as the pasta dish is similar to the noodles in the previous world, Rio decides to order a bowl, feeling nostalgic with every bite. Continuing on his journey, Rio knows he must head to Yagumo, but stopping at a nearby guild, Rio reasons he should at least purchase some noodles for his long journey. Right outside of the Merchants Guild, Rio overhears people selling meat menju, something Rio also recognizes from his past life, but upon heading into the Rika Merchant Guild, Rio is asked to take off his goods and weapons. Happy to comply, Rio asks where he can store them, surprising Lot, who notices that Rio has black hair. As his personal escort, Lot shows Rio around the place, helping him pick up and order various items from their store. Asked to wait a bit, Lot and her associate pack up the items Rio ordered, worried that it may be too heavy to transport, but Rio reassures them he is quite strong. Seeing the way Rio sips on the black tea, Lot wonders why Rio enjoys black tea so much, impressed to learn that Rio picked up the habit from a friend. As Lot and Rio chat a bit more, Rio takes the chance to write a letter, informing Celia that he won't be able to write any more letters whilst in the Strahl region. With Rio heading off, Lot's full name is revealed to be Lissalot and her associate's name is Cosette. Making his way through a forest, Rio stumbles upon a wounded girl, choosing to check up on them, but suddenly senses something is off. Right on cue, the injured girl tosses a poison dart at Rio, forcing him to tank the shot, only to kick the girl away. Assessing the girl, Rio notices her to be a beast person, but Rio neutralizes the poison. Surprised, the girl leaps forward with her blade, aiming at Rio's head, but Rio manages to evade, retaliating with some projectiles of his own. Impressed by the girl's speed, Rio realizes the girl is now only layering a movement buff, both rushing each other. As Rio fends off the girl's advances, the girl wonders how a mere human could match her speed, but seeing as the girl is too focused on his blade, Rio takes advantage by disarming the girl with his fists. Attempting to retaliate, the girl lunges towards Rio's body, but having lured her in, Rio finally manages to pin the girl down, but out of nowhere the girl begins to act strange, calling out to her mother for help. With no other choice, Rio puts the girl to sleep, tying her up only to realize the girl has been wearing a collar of submission. Having read up on such a collar in the past, Rio manages to replicate a spell to dispel the collar, but Rio can't help but feel some familiarity with the girl. Flashing back, the girl's name is revealed to be Latifa, but as she wakes up she mentions how in her past life she was named Endo Suzune, a name Stuart, her slave owner, doesn't recognize. Growing up, Stuart would force Latifa into submission with the cursed collar, something Latifa grew to submit to. Having woken up, Latifa is on edge around Rio, attempting to break out of her binds but no luck. When Rio states that he only wants to talk, Latifa gets flashbacks of Stuart torturing her, but Rio reassures Latifa that the collar controlling her has been removed, bringing Latifa to tears. Now more tamed, Rio asks who sent Latifa, sad to learn that Latifa doesn't know much about her masters, but Latifa does reveal that Stuart was a part of the household that ordered her around. Now knowing that Stuart's family called for a hit on him, Rio chooses to be more careful moving forward, but before Rio releases Latifa he asks if Latifa plans to attack him. Confirming that Latifa no longer has any bloodlust, Rio sets Latifa free, returning all her stuff. Seeing as Latifa looks confused, Rio remembers that beast people are normally hunted and made slaves, therefore Rio suggests that Latifa head east where she'll be able to reunite with other demi-humans. Just like that Rio takes his leave, but not even a few seconds later, Rio notices that Latifa is slowly following behind him. Demanding to know what Latifa has planned, Latifa shyly utters that she wants to travel with Rio, but Rio reminds Latifa that he's still wary of her as she did just try to slay him. Apologizing, Latifa offers to become Rio's slave if it means he'll trust her, but Rio fears that it'll only be tortuous with that collar around Latifa's neck. Seeing as Latifa is clearly lost, Rio agrees to allow Latifa to accompany him, prompting Latifa to toss away the collar as they continue their journey. As a quick break, Rio whips up a quick sandwich for Latifa, finding it adorable that Latifa is treasuring her first genuine meal. Having crossed over into the wilderness, Rio notes how they are finally where the beast people reside, but seeing as it's getting late they both decide to set up camp. With Celia receiving Rio's most recent letter, Latifa is seen recognizing the pasta Rio crafted, making Rio wonder if the girl is also from Japan. As the two eat their fill, they clock out for the night, but Rio overhears Latifa uttering that she wants to return home to her family in Japan. Comforting her through the night, Latifa awakens beside Rio, flustered to see Rio resembles the boy on the train with her. When Latifa tries calling Rio her big brother, Rio awakens, scaring Latifa as she bumps her head. Seeing as Latifa was reincarnated and forced into being a slave at such a young age, Rio decides to take care of her as much as he can, both venturing through various terrain and slaying various creatures as they venture deeper into the wilderness. Having set up camp, the two rest up, only for Rio to ask if Latifa can see the massive tree nearby, but Latifa gets confused, mentioning how she can only see trees from the forest. With the two making their way towards the massive-looking tree, Latifa notes how she's beginning to pick up strange scents, something Rio believes means they are almost out of the forest. Since it's getting late, they once again set up camp, but seeing as Latifa is still having nightmares, Rio helps by quelling the dark thoughts. Out of nowhere, Rio spots a mysterious-looking wolf observing them, suddenly blinded by a mysterious light. Having been temporarily blinded by the bright light, Rio barely manages to dodge a smash from his enemies, having no choice but to slam the ground to determine the number of enemies. With the enemies revealed to be other beast people, they begin deducing that Rio wields a form of spirit arts and had managed to determine their numbers, suddenly hearing Rio offering to talk things out. With Uzuma the winged girl worried about Rio's intentions, Seirei their leader reasons that they should hear Rio out, asking Orphea and Alma to investigate Rio's campsite. As Seirei speaks with Rio, Orphea and Alma suddenly realize that Rio has put Latifa to sleep with a spirit art, alerting Uzuma as she instantly rushes to strike Rio down. As Rio attempts to heal himself, the girls grow even more surprised at Rio's capabilities, but seeing as things have escalated, Seirei declares that they'll be taking Rio in for an investigation. Before Rio can explain the situation, the girls manage to restrain and knock Rio out. As Rio sleeps, he's suddenly suspended in a blue abyss, spotting the pink-haired spirit floating above him, calling out Haruto. Surprised to see her once more, Rio asks how the girl knows him, but before she can reveal anything she disappears, promising to always be his. Just as he wakes up, Rio sees Mii calling out to her, but in the real world Orphea and Alma spots Rio squirming whilst chained up. As Rio tries to figure out where he is, he suddenly spots Latifa rushing into his room, hugging him tightly as she was worried Rio left her. When Latifa demands to know who locked Rio up, the four girls apologetically enter, standing by as one of the elders enters. Asking for Rio's forgiveness, the elders ask to learn more about who Rio and Latifa are, but first Uzuma begs for forgiveness, prompting the other girls to follow suit. With the elder annoyed at what the girls have done, she states that Uzuma will be punished later, but Rio is more concerned about his shackles. With Rio now freed, the elder tells Rio he'll be meeting the town's elders tomorrow, but for tonight he is free to rest and use the room with Latifa. The next morning, Rio is guided up one of the town's massive trees, amazed to learn that the massive tree that led him here is known as the World Tree, a location where the Dryads reside. The elder gets intrigued, learning that Rio was able to see the tree at all, since the tree has been cloaked by illusion magic and would require mastering over spirit arts to break. Amazed to hear that Rio had been self-taught since birth, Rio is finally guided to the room with the other elders, all introducing themselves as Sildora, Ursula and finally the dwarf Dominic. When Rio formally introduces himself, Sildora along with the other elders take the chance to apologize for treating Rio so badly, even after rescuing one of their beastkin from slavery. Rio reassures the elders that he was simply doing what was right, suddenly asked by the elders what Rio would like as a reward for his kind act. Rio initially asks for Latifa to be given a home in their village, but when Rio hears that the elders were already planning on doing so, Rio asks if he can stay in the village alongside Latifa for a bit. Happy to let Rio stay, the elders all welcome Rio as part of their family, but Rio is also curious if he could learn how to better control his spirit arts from an experienced master. Happy to oblige, the elders begin to wrap up the meeting, but suddenly a Dryad appears. Introducing herself as Dryas, the spirit of the World Tree, Dryas reveals that she senses a sleeping spirit from within Rio, but Rio is confused. Dryas asks if Rio is unable to control magic, something Rio confirms, prompting Dryas to have a better look into Rio, leaning in close only to sense a massive amount of stored-up odd. When Rio asks what Dryas has discovered, Dryas reveals that Rio has a person-shaped spirit within him, one of the rarest occurrences for humans. Dryas states that spirits that take the shape of a human like herself are usually classified as second-rate and higher, but seeing as the sleeping spriting within Rio is also a human-shaped spirit, Dryas believes that Rio is housing one of the 6 great spirits, spirits believed to have all been wiped out during the Divine Demon War 1,000 years ago. Seeing as Rio is unsure what to make of things, the elders surmises that Rio will be getting special treatment moving forward. Happy to hear that, Rio is escorted to his new home, meeting up with Latifa and the other girls who show Rio around his new home, even sharing a meal together. During the meal, Rio notices that one of the food items closely resembles rice, getting excited, but as the gang cleans up, Sarah reveals that Urusula has tasked the girls to serve and stay with Rio and Latifa. Right on cue, Ursula shows up, apologizing as Sarah and the other girls will be staying by Rio's side as a way to atone for discriminating against a human. Plus the girls will also try to grow close to Latifa, making sure she doesn't always have to depend on Rio. As Rio and Latifa spend more time in the village, they slowly grow attached to the village's culture, picking up various skills and habits along with spending time with all the residents in town. During the Grand Spirit Festival, the elders chose to offer and worship the Dryads for lending them a home, but at the same time we see 2 mysterious men flying on their griffin to a certain location. Having landed, the adventurer waits outside for the hooded man, revealed to be Reese. When the adventurer spots Reese returning out of the cave with an egg, the adventurer wonders what the egg could be used for, but Reese simply states that he plans to perform an experiment with the egg. As Reese mounts the griffin, the adventurer clings onto the egg, but unknowingly to the adventurer, Reese had planned for the parents of the eggs to follow close behind them. With it already being 1 year since Rio and Latifa joined the village, the elders announce Rio and Latifa as sworn members of their village, both receiving a blessing kiss by Dryas. As the village parties throughout the night, Rio wounds up surrounded by some ladies, but Orphea and Sarah in their drunken state can't help but feel Rio is still wary of them. Seeing all the commotion, Alma joins in, asking Rio to relax, especially now since they're all family. Realizing that he was a little stiff, Rio apologizes, promising to be more approachable. Changing topics, the girls rush to stock up on more drinks, something Latifa wants to watch, but seeing as Latifa has grown closer to the others, Rio reasons with Ursula that it's about time that he tells Latifa the bad news and finally leaves the village. At the same time, we see that Reese and the adventurer have settled down for the night, but just in case Reese states that he'll be quickly surveying the area. For safety, Reese has the adventurer swallow an artifact, instructing the man to escape with the griffin if something bad were to happen. With Reese disappearing into the forest, he takes flight, confirming that the monsters following them have finally caught up to their location, curious as to how everything will transpire. At the same time, Rio and Latifa are out on a midnight stroll, but after walking long enough, Rio stops to ask if Latifa is enjoying her time in the village. Happy to hear that Latifa considers the village her home, Rio sadly utters that he'll need to leave the village soon, refusing to allow Latifa to follow him since his next journey will be dangerous. Frustrated, Latifa runs off, but cutting to the elders, they inform Sarah and the girls that there has been a strange breach in their home barrier. With the girls rushing towards the scene of the danger, we cut to Reese, who has returned to the monster's nest, pleased to see only the eggs of the monsters remain, gleefully collecting them. Back with the girls, they seem to have located 2 living creatures nearby, identifying them as a human and a griffin. When the girls go in for a closer inspection, the adventurer suddenly awakens, slowly backing away when the girls demand to know what the adventurer is holding. Refusing to answer, the adventurer manages to escape on the griffin, coincidentally riding off towards the village, forcing the girls to try and shoot him down. With no luck, the girls chase after the man, but out of nowhere wyverns appear, seemingly swatting at the adventurer. Seeing as the wyverns are solely focused on the adventurer, the girls deduce that the man must be carrying a wyvern egg, declaring that they are to stop the wyverns from entering the village at all cost. Having finished up stealing all the eggs, Reese makes use of the artifact the man swallowed, destroying it and taking the man's life. Seeing the man fall, Sarah instructs Alma to take care of the wyverns, lending Alma her bond spirit. On the ground, we see Latifa has accidentally stumbled onto the corpse of the man along with the shattered wyvern egg, horrified when she spots an enraged wyvern land beside her. Back in the village, the residents run for cover, alerting Rio as he learns that wyverns have entered the village's forest in the exact location where Latifa ran off into. Able to barely evade and dodge the wyvern's lethal slashes, Latifa cries for help, giving Alma enough time to intervene and protect her. When Alma's basic strikes fail to harm the wyvern, Alma calls for her spirit bond lion, combining the lion's fire attack and the wolf's ice magic, but even with such a powerful combination, Alma is easily knocked aside by the wyvern. Suggesting that they both flee, Latifah realizes that Alma is their last line of defense before the wyvern reaches the village, so Latifah chooses to distract the wyvern to buy Alma some time. Before Alma can complete her incantations, the wyvern manages to corner Latifah, but before Latifah can be squished, Rio appears bringing Latifah to safety. Seeing as Latifah isn't hurt, Rio charges directly at the wyvern, beating and bashing the monster with his fist. When the wyvern releases a breath of fire, Rio simply counters with some wind magic, but when the wyvern charges up another breath, Rio capitalizes by closing the wyvern's mouth, having the breath harm the wyvern from the inside out. Having defeated the black wyvern, the girls realize that the remaining wyverns have begun to flee, impressed to learn that Rio single-handedly took down the pack leader. The next morning, Latifah apologized for running off during the previous night, admitting that she was simply scared she would never get to see Rio ever again. Understanding Celia's feelings, Rio reassures Latifah that he'll always treasure Latifah as his little sister, something Latifah is very grateful for. Upon hearing that Rio plans to head further east to visit his family's hometown, something that makes Latifah open up as she reveals that she had been reincarnated and originally lived in Japan. Not surprised, Rio admits that he too was reincarnated, shocking Latifah as they both have had to adapt to this cruel new world, both growing closer as a result of this. With the day of Rio's departure arriving, the elders all choose to give Rio with some final gifts. First, Dominic shows off a mithril-crafted blade meant to absorb Rio's spirit arts along with armor crafted from the wyvern Rio slayed. Next, Ursula hands Rio a bag of assorted medicines and elixirs along with various food items and drinks. Finally, Sildora chooses to give Rio a space-time cache, an item Rio knows is very valuable, gratefully accepting the items. Having used the space-time cache to store all of his items, Rio promises to return if the village ever needs him, saying his final goodbyes to the village and Latifah only to fly off. Cutting to Celia, she still has yet to receive any updates on what Rio has been up to, but Rio seems to have finally continued on his journey back to his hometown. Check out one of our other videos on the screen or in the info card above. Subscribe, like and comment.